Hi, Steve. Good to see you.
Good to see you. So, you, and I have trouble keeping track of you because I see you in Egypt speaking very fluent Arabic. The next thing I know, you're in Shikoku, wandering around, staying in Japanese inns. Then you sing a Cantonese song. But I know that you're very fluent in Spanish and Portuguese. And now you're going to take on Italian.
Yep. Italian's my summer project.
Okay.
So the plan is to, I live here in London, and one of the things I've learned from my last few years experimenting with languages is that the best languages to learn really are those that you can actually use on a daily basis and keep up, make sense of in your life. And here in London, I meet loads of Italians wherever I go, and they're such nice people, and I would really like to speak it. I think it would be a great thing for me in my life, so that's my project this summer.
Okay. Well, you'll be very successful. It'll be easy.
We will see. There's lots of interesting factors which we can get into.
The only thing I would say is that I hope you're more ambitious than just being able to say buongiorno to a waiter in an Italian restaurant in London, because there's so much to Italian culture, literature, history, and all that stuff. Once you get started, you won't stop at that. Like, you'll be able to say buongiorno after the first day, but there's a lot of depth there. That's all.
Yeah, I mean, it's a springboard, isn't it? And there's so many opportunities here just for. I mean, you know what it's like when you meet someone. You start off with a buongiorno, and then before you know it, you're talking about where you went last summer. So yeah, lots of great stuff, great opportunities.
Yeah. So what's your plan?
The plan is, so I think language learning has been getting a bit of a bad press recently because I'm sure, I know you've seen, many other people have seen this study that came out recently that said apparently the cutoff age for learning a new language to native level is 10 years. And, whilst we could debate the ins and outs of that, I've seen a lot of people kind of pick up on that and almost use it as an excuse for not learning languages themselves. A number of people in the media have been saying this. And so I thought this would be a good opportunity to not only add another language to my repertoire, but also to kind of show people, look, it doesn't matter where you live, you can actually learn another language reasonably quickly to a point where, you can have meaningful conversations. You can do it from home, you can enjoy it, and you don't have to pick up and move abroad and all that stuff. And you also don't have to reach full native level. You can get to you can have very meaningful conversations and relationships with people without having to spend a lifetime doing it.
Obviously, I couldn't agree more. Several points there. One, learning a language where that language is not spoken. Absolutely. I learned Mandarin Chinese in Hong Kong in 1968. You couldn't find a Mandarin speaker on the streets of Hong Kong in 1968. So if you can immerse yourself in I called it creating your own language world, then you can learn it quite well. At some point, of course, you have to start using it. But you can build yourself up quite effectively without being immersed in the language. So that's with regard, therefore, to being in an environment where the language isn't surrounding you. Insofar as age is concerned, it may very well be that the 8-year-old is going to learn it better than you or me. Like, so what? I've learned half of my languages since the age of 60. Maybe, theoretically, if I had been 10, I would have learned them faster. I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. It doesn't matter. But the third thing, too, is that you have an advantage because you've learned all these other languages. So you're fit. So it's like if you were to take up a sport that you've never played before, you're going to learn it fairly quickly if you're fit. If you're not fit, it'll take you longer. But nothing prevents you from getting fit. So you get fit by learning that first language if you haven't learned any, and then you get better and better at it. So you're going to do very well. It may be that a person who's never learned another language will struggle. But they can also achieve their goal. It just might take them a little bit longer than it'll take you.
Yeah, I certainly feel kind of maturing, so to speak.
Yeah.
Because of context, the people who don't know, I know French and Spanish and Portuguese, so 3 other Romance languages to a fairly good level. So I'm not starting from scratch. So I do have that side of it, but my knowledge of Italian is virtually non-existent. It's probably the same as someone who studied it at school 30 or 40 years ago. So in that sense, I am starting from scratch. But my kind of my angle for this, if you like, what I'm personally interested in. Because as you know, like I've been getting more and more interested in in input-based methods of learning. So learning through lots of exposure to the language. And it's kind of a work in progress for me because I've used these kind of methods on languages that I know better. But this is the first time for me to actually learn a language from scratch using input-based methods. So my aim for the first month of this project is going to be to do no speaking at all. It's going to be just lots and lots of exposure to interesting content, as interesting as it can be from the beginning level. So I'm going to be doing lots and lots of listening and reading, and then we'll see what happens after that. I'm probably going to want to start speaking fairly early on, but what I'm most interested in is what happens when I open my mouth after a month of nothing but exposure to Italian. I have no idea what's going to happen, but that's what I'm kind of interested to see as like a first landmark.
Well, I've had that experience in a variety of different situations. For example, with Greek. So I went, 3 months with Greek, then I started speaking. Of course, you struggle at first, but inevitably my experience, whether it be with Greek or even more recently with Arabic, I spoke to someone, they're all amazed. Like, this is your first conversation? So in fact, you do better than you would think. The other thing is, with regard to Romanian, I had to go to Romania. So I had a timetable. So I spent the first month purely input, the second month continuing my input, and then speaking to italki tutors in Romanian. When I arrived in Romania, I was flying. Like, people were, amazed, and I had a great time. So there I had a constraint. I had to do it in 2 months. So I spent 1 month on input, and then 1 month combining input with output. I didn't want the day I arrived in Romania to be the first time I had ever spoken the language. Yeah. So, and I think with your background, Romanian is close to Italian in a way, but it's not as close as Spanish and French are to Italian. So you'll be ready.
It's an interesting set of problems as well, which is the case of interference, because you often, knowing Spanish and Portuguese like I do, you very often get Spanish speakers who will try and speak Portuguese by saying, "Falar" instead of "hablar," and then they think they speak the other language. So for me, almost with the background I do have in those different languages, what's going to be interesting for me to see is actually to what extent can I prevent that interference from happening? To what extent can I actually get to the point where I can speak Italian without just kind of reinventing Spanish words in the process? That, I think, is going to be a challenge, because I've had trouble in the past separating languages that are really close.
That's a very interesting point. And I moved to speaking Romanian more quickly than I did going into Portuguese from Spanish. Even though Portuguese is much, much more similar to Spanish. And I think so that the tendency in trying to speak Portuguese when I had my Spanish was to speak Portuñol, or to speak some kind of a slight adaptation of Spanish. And the solution there is, when I first tried to do Portuguese, I bought this living language, and there were a bunch of disjointed phrases, and I bought a book on how Spanish changes, the differences between Spanish and Portuguese, and I tried to absorb, these shortcuts, and it didn't help at all. And when, I think the mini stories we have at LingQ, which I hope you'll use, they're so effective because they're just daily situations with the most common verbs in the language, common adjectives, pronouns, and you're just hearing this stuff repeated in silly little stories about everyday life. So you're not trying to dissect the language. How is Italian different from French? You're just allowing the brain to sort through and get used to it. And I think the transition there will be faster than if you tried to sort of intellectually parse Italian versus French.
Well, certainly in terms of receptors, I'm going to guess that within a couple of weeks I'm going to be able to understand a fair amount of Italian just from the similarity.
The first few days you'll understand it.
The production is a different matter, isn't it? Because the production, then you've got to not unlearn the other languages, but you've got to learn to parse it in your brain. And, right. I remember actually having to, after learning Spanish and Portuguese, I had to actually kind of learn how to use them both simultaneously. It was almost like learning a new language in a way, because learning to keep them separate in my brain. But yeah, so let's talk about material, because my plan is, I'm a big believer in stories, as you know. I've written these short story books, and so for me, it's stories all the way. They have everything. They have the interest factor, they have the repetition, they have the quality use of language, you have the whole language experience. So my plan is to start with your mini stories at LingQ, because they're written for exactly that purpose. And what I'm also going to do is use LingQ to actually track some of my statistics, because the thing about this project is, by its nature, it's quite difficult to pin down, isn't it? It's quite difficult to judge progress. So at the very least, what I'm going to be able to do is, if I'm using LingQ for my input, and I'm quite strict with marking my known words and things like that, I will at least be able to track, as you mentioned to me the other day over email, I will at least be able to track words read, hours listened to, and then words learned. So that's going to be a very interesting way to evaluate, 1 or 2 months down the line, to evaluate what's actually gone in, if you like.
A couple of thoughts there. First of all, I always quote this lady at the University of San Diego who said, the most important thing, or the only things that matter in language learning are your attitude and time and the ability to notice. But leaving that aside, time. To me, the most important statistics at LingQ are the ones that track your activity level. If you're able to maintain a high level of activity, lots of words read, lots of links created, all this kind of stuff, you will get there. So that's the measure. So at times when I say, I'm not making any progress, but in fact I've put in all this time, I've saved all these words, I've learned all these words, it reminds me that actually I am making progress. So that's with regard to those statistics. I think I even think in schools they should track the amount of activity kids put into learning a language, rather than trying to evaluate their ability to get the subjunctive right or whatever it might be. Yeah. Sure. One thing I wanted to say too with regard to input, I think that mini stories are a great place to start. And so, by the way, I'm going to a conference tomorrow in Portland, Oregon. Stephen Krashen is going to be there, and it's all about storytelling or story listening or whatever they call it. But he talks about compelling input. We talk about compelling input, but we know that when you start, the input isn't very compelling. I mean, that's just a reality. The really most compelling input is the genuine, authentic, if you're interested in literature, if you're interested in whatever it might be, history, science, whatever, that you can read subjects of interest in the language. So you're pursuing the subject of interest, and by the way, you're learning the language. That's optimal. It takes a few steps to get there. And that's why I think the mini story is a good start. And then I think some form of graded material where you're not totally thrown into, difficult, like lots of vocabulary, and yet it's a little more interesting stories. Or when I was learning Chinese, they had a graded history reader in Chinese and stuff like that. If you can have that little step, then it takes you from the beginner material to the authentic material. So compelling input is a great story, but in fact we've got to gradually move ourselves into the genuinely compelling content.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's like the aim. If it was Arabic or Chinese, you've got to have to take a slightly longer view with it, I think. But with Italian, I think the prospect of getting into real content fairly early on is really, really, really interesting, because I think it's achievable given the language in question and my background, and also when you are into that authentic material, the amount of variety in the exposure as well just kind of balloons. So we've got the mini stories at LingQ to kick off with. I don't know how long they'll last me, like a couple of weeks, I guess.
You can always go back to them to refresh, to review. Yeah.
Well, those have got my series of graded readers. I had Italian readers for beginners and intermediate. I also have my conversations material, which is more kind of dialogue based. I'll make a point of documenting all these resources that I use, because Krashen, I was emailing with Krashen the other day, and I was asking about this, and he said, look, the thing that most people are going to want to know, most likely, is where do you get your compelling, comprehensive input from? That's a big thing. So I'm going to make sure to document all of this so that people can, at least for Italian, can go back and see, what I've used. But then very quickly, I want to start to move on to, my real aim, I think, is to get to authentic material, which I would be consuming in English anyway, but to kind of get to it in Italian. So for me, that's well, most of what I do actually is just sort of read the news and business books. Right. That's mostly what I do. So I guess I'll try and do that in Italian and see what happens.
Now, one of the problems is when you get into authentic material, there's a lot of authentic material which is text without audio, and then there's a lot of authentic material which is audio with no text. For example, of course, newspapers or articles that you can find, and in my case, I would import them into LingQ, or audio like Rai 2 has this series, Alle 8 della Sera, which is phenomenal, 20 episode things on Roman emperors and you name it. But there's no text there. There's no transcript. So in between, you've got something like Il Narratore, who puts out these audio ebooks. So you have both the audio and the ebook. And of course, the ebook can be imported into LingQ, and you can do all your usual linking and statistic keeping and so forth. So, but then at some point, you graduate beyond that, and you just consume audio or just consume text.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's talk about time, Steve. So this particular moment in my life, I have a luxury of time.
Okay.
More than I usually do. So, from your experience with this kind of method, is there an upper daily limit, like beyond which you find yourself just kind of zoning out or not being able to focus?
Well, when I studied Chinese, I was going at it 6-7 hours a day when I was learning Mandarin. But I had 3 hours in the classroom, and then I put in another 3-4 hours at home. But I was possessed, right? So I learned it in a year, learned 4,000 characters, I was reading novels and the whole thing. But I was possessed. I think, like right now, I mean, I'm not working. I could put as much time into Arabic as I wanted, but there's family, there's friends, there's a whole bunch of stuff. If I manage to get in 2 hours, that's a good day. And a good part of that is just listening when I'm cleaning up around the house or in the car or whatever. So I think if you can get in 2 to 3 hours a day, then, and I think the satisfying thing in your case with Italian, you'll move through it very quickly. Like Arabic for me is tough. But for you, you can go into the mini stories, you'll understand it all. But you still have to work on the phrases. That's why I think the activities, if you do the flashcard, the activities you should use is the reverse flashcard, like starting from English into Italian, and the dictation, where you hear the Italian and you got to write it out. That forces you to concentrate a little bit more, whereas the flashcard, you can just flip through them. But for you, yeah, you'll go quickly, and we like it when we're having success. If I'm sitting there and I keep forgetting the same Arabic word, I get discouraged. But with you, you'll fly through that stuff. And pretty soon you'll be onto your graded reading material, and pretty soon you'll be onto things of interest. And so you won't be fighting as much resistance. So I think you'll find that you'll be spending 2 to 3 hours a day.
Yeah, I think what I'm going to aim for, because because often one big objection that people would have to, to say, well, I do this myself, well, who's got 3 hours a day to spend on language learning? Most people don't. Right? So I think what I'm probably going to aim for is 1 to 2 hours of sit down, focused study, because that's on the upper end of what most people can achieve. But then being quite determined in using my downtime to get that extra input. So if I'm on the when I go to my co-working space here, I'm on the train or I'm commuting for about 45 minutes. So that's an extra hour and a half of input right there every single day. And then watching TV in the evening, I don't do much of it. If I do, then I'll do that in Italian. So trying to again, like the opportunity with Italian, because it's less of a leap for me, perhaps, is that authentic input. I can maybe access it a little bit earlier on than I might be able to with other languages. So there is value there in just more general listening and reading.
I would say 70% of my language learning time is just plain listening.
Yeah.
And one little bit of advice, when you do whatever you're doing on LingQ, whether it be mini stories or stuff that you bring in, create a playlist, because the playlist will track your hours of listening. If you just bring it into iTunes, you won't be able to track how many minutes or hours you actually spent listening. So it is interesting to have a statistic of how much you're listening every day. And if you create the playlist keeps track of how many times you listen to that item, and you get a total hours listened.
Yeah, and with all the material we've mentioned, with your mini stories, with my graded readings, my conversations material, we've got the audio and text, so we can import it in. good tip about making a playlist. I didn't know that. I didn't know you had to make a playlist in order to get the stats. I'll make sure.
Otherwise, it can't. Well, it'll track if you're listening while reading it on the site. But if you simply take that audio and put it into iTunes and listen on your whatever MP3 player, it can't track that. So whereas if you create a playlist, it tracks it. Okay. And if you have your graded readers, if they are under copyright, you can't share them in the library, but you can import them for your own purposes.
Import it myself.
Exactly. I mean, that's what I did with Acimil. I imported Acimil, imported the audio files, but I can't share it with anyone.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
I did actually try to make, because I had a few people complain about this before. They couldn't copy the text from the Kindle thing. I'm not quite sure how that works.
So the Kindle, you try to get it to if you can get the file as an EPUB or whatever, a PDF, and then I go to Calibre, and Calibre I convert it to a text file, and the text file I can import it.
Yeah.
So you have to go through Calibre.
Wouldn't it be a good world where everything you have to audio and text and click of a button, you can just put it where you want it to? I guess we're moving in the right direction.
Exactly.
One last question then.
With your graded readers, you should have a website where I can come on, pay you for your graded reader, and then be able to download both the audio and the text in a format, say, that I can use at LingQ.
Yeah, that's a really good idea. Yeah.
Anyway, Routledge, by the way, does that to some extent. You can download audio from Routledge, which is useless unless you have their text, but at least that's a start. And I think you can also buy the ebook version. So I can go to Routledge, I can buy the ebook version for some of their books, say even in Arabic. I can buy the ebook version, and then I can download the audio free, like they give you the audio. So that's heading in the right direction.
Yeah. You see, one other thing that I'm thinking about is because I want to, obviously we make videos and we put them online and stuff. And I don't know whether you feel when you're doing these projects, whether you feel any particular sense of pressure to perform, so to speak. I'd quite actually like to enjoy this project. For me, I've had a very busy few years, and I'm kind of quite looking forward to this project as something I can enjoy. I've never enjoyed languages ever as much as when I first started learning them back when I was 20 years old with no pressure. It was just pure kind of fun. So I've been kind of wondering how to both make it useful and document it, whilst also being able to enjoy it rather selfishly myself.
It's a very good point. Like when I started Russian, I didn't have my YouTube channel or anything. For a year I didn't speak Russian, and I was on my own schedule, and I started listening to audiobooks, Turgenev or whatever it might be. No pressure. But now, because I've got this following on YouTube, when I start speaking Arabic, people are going to be poking holes in my Arabic. When I speak Russian, there's always someone who comes in to point out that I messed up whatever point of grammar. So yeah, I think we learn languages for ourselves. A lot of the sort of input side of it is tremendously enjoyable because we access a whole new world. Even my limited Arabic, I have a better understanding of, quote, the Arab world than I had before. It just comes that little bit closer. So most of the rewards are personal. And when we speak, it's to communicate. It's not to perform. And that's why I never criticize anyone's performance, so to speak. Whoever comes on and speaks, I can speak language X, Y, Z. Fine, good for you, clapped. However well you speak it, that's your thing. It doesn't matter. So I think we have to try to step back and not say, I'm going to demonstrate how clever I am because I'm going to learn Italian in 3 months. I think that's not the issue. The issue is to encourage people to say, here are the different ways, non-traditional ways, that you can enjoy language learning and you can make progress, whatever that might be. And it might be fast for someone like yourself who has other Romance languages. There might be people who are even faster. Luca could probably go out and learn Mongolian in a couple of weeks. But that's fine. Everyone, goes at their own speed.
Yeah. Yeah, well, we'll see. I mean, the ultimate measure for me is going to be if I can walk down the streets of Calibre up here and, bump into an Italian person and go for a drink and have a nice chat about different ways of making pizza. If I can do that, then I'll be pretty happy.
Oh, you'll do more than that.
Yeah, so I'll have to find a good way of actually kind of documenting that. I've been asking people some suggestions.
One question: are you going to document your very first attempt to speak, or are you going to wait until you have had 3 or 4 under your belt?
I'm going to document the very first one. I don't think it's going to be very informative. I mean, in the sense that it's just a snapshot. But I'm gonna when I do speak for the very first time after 1 month, it will be on camera. I'll make sure of that. And I'm just gonna have to fight my kind of conditioning to kind of perform. Okay. You know, I just try to make it as natural as I can.
One suggestion, you know, if you make a video, your very first time speaking Italian, then of course you're going to stumble and all, and that sits up there on YouTube, and people come in and say, "Are he ever lousy?" It might be an idea to sort of create a bit of a portfolio where you take, you know, 2 minutes of your first, and then 2 minutes of the second time, and have this sort of take the first 5 of them, take 2 minutes of each, and make it one video. I think that would be more interesting than just putting one video up there where you struggle and and ah and speak Spanish and all the things that are going to happen. It's just a thought.
That's interesting. So that could be like conversations over the, you know, like over the course of a week, for example,
yeah.
Every day.
Whatever. So that because your 5th time is going to be remarkably better than your first time. Yeah. And so rather than leaving that first time up there, and people come, they find your video, and they, who's this guy? He's supposed to be a polyglot. He doesn't speak Italian very well. Yeah. Whereas if you have, here is this progression, you know, time-lapse progression of 5 conversations. And then they'll see how much, because you're going to activate it so quickly. I can assure you, with this intensive input, you're going to activate it very, very quickly. And that will be interesting to see. Yeah.
That's a really good idea. I'm gonna definitely think about that. Because yeah, it's all about, we want to, people, no one wants to sit and watch reading a book for a month. So I'm not going to obviously film that, but I'll try to find ways of making it informative as well as...
Week 1. If you're going to speak to someone every day for 5 days, week one is one video. 1.5 minutes, 2 minutes of each. 10-minute video.
There we go. Job done. All right. Well, I'm excited. I'm going to go and get started.
All right. Yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing more about how things go.
Well, let's check in in a month then. Okay. And I'm going to keep notes of things that occur to me, difficulties I'm having, opportunities, struggles, stuff like that. It'd be interesting to compare notes after that time.
Okay, sounds good. Good luck.
I'm not going to do it in Italian, or I'm not going to put myself to that just yet.
Okay. See ya.
All right, Steve.